Hey, welcome to the Global Landscapes Forum, Bonn Digital Conference 2020, where we're now actually into the third day of our conference, third and final day. And this is actually my final interview for this conference, where we are focusing on food in the time of crisis. My name is Natasha Elkington, and I'll be your host for this next live session. And for our audience, please remember to send in your questions and tell us where you're tuning in from, and any comments you want to share. We're happy to receive them. So I'm very excited to introduce my next guest, who's only 50, just turned 15, and making waves in the climate world and with the climate crisis. Her name is Alexandria Villasenor, who's the co-founder of the US Climate Strike and founder of the Earth Uprising. And she was also named one of the 16 women restoring the Earth by the Global Landscapes Forum this year on International Women's Day. And a very staunch follower of the Fridays for Futures movement. So very excited to have you, and thank you for joining us, Alexandria.
Yay, thank you so much for having me.
Great, thank you. So where are you tuning in from?
Yes, so I am tuning in right now from Davis, California, where it is currently 4:15 a.m.
Wow.
So I'm very excited to be here, though.
Well, thank you for getting out of bed, for joining us for this half hour. We appreciate it and all the hard work that you're doing. So I guess, for us to begin, I think it's important that we just talk about what's actually happening in the States, with the protests going on right now. Did you want to just share what's going on in California, or what's happening at the moment? Because I thought it was dying down, but it looks like the movement might be growing.
Yes, definitely. So right now in the United States, there are uprisings happening all over the country. And it was first sparked about a week ago with the death of George Floyd, when a police officer ended up killing him. And that was the main spark for people all across the country and even the world now, which it was with that protests that have started to happen. You're seeing people all across the country who are starting to just get angry with what has been happening and how people of color have been treated. And so our police forces do unjustly target Black people and people of color. And structural racism continues to be a significant problem. So the thousands of people protesting right now are also expressing their anxiety. And I think that climate anxiety and the anxiety we're seeing in the streets are definitely connected. Climate change will also disproportionately affect people, and what we're seeing is a fight for our lives and a fight for our futures. One thing with this current uprising all across the country is I'm seeing people and activists from so many different issues starting to stand up for the Black Lives Matter movement, which is so important, because what makes an activist is standing up for the greater good and fighting for what's important and right. So the activists who campaign for many different issues are coming together and uniting behind the Black Lives Matter movement. So racism is a foundational issue for so many of the issues society is experiencing today, from inequality to the climate crisis. And these problems are all connected to each other, and that's why our activism does need to be intersectional. And actually, there is a protest this Saturday at the California State Capitol in Sacramento that I'll be going to. And up until now, I've been providing a lot of behind the scenes support. I've been helping fundraise for the bail funds around the country. And I've been supporting and amplifying Black organizers with not only Black Lives Matter, but with activists of color and organizers in my own organization, Earth Uprising. And so I think that it's just so important for people to be getting involved with this current movement in any way that they possibly can when it comes to protesting, signing a petition, or donating. Everything that you can do is important.
That's very true. And I mean, it's amazing how you're saying, like, it's all, when you think of the George Floyd situation and then with climate, but you're right, it's all one, we're all interconnected, and everything, works off each other.
Definitely. I think that, the climate crisis, what happened is there is these structures that were put in place, and the climate crisis will disproportionately affect people of color and people in low-income communities. And that's why it's so important to have those people heard and at the forefront. And so one thing that I focus a lot on is making sure that people, especially all around the world, are heard in this movement. I think that this current Black Lives Matter movement has just brought attention to how important it is to have people of color in the climate conversation.
Right. Right. Because I mean, even like with the whole pandemic situation, like it's, you know, if they're in disadvantaged situations, then they're the ones who have been hit harder than the rest of the community in the US, on top of that too.
Yeah, that's one thing that was brought a lot to the attention is people in some communities, they are unable to protect themselves from the current pandemic. I had a friend who is from the global south, and her hometown was hit with just this hurricane that came, and it was very upsetting because her community was unable to protect themselves from the coronavirus because they were all just trying to recover from it. And so you're seeing now with the climate crisis that a lot of communities are going to be unable to protect themselves from the virus when they're constantly being hit.
Right, right. Very true. You make some very important points, and I totally agree with you. Sort of kind of like moving on to like more focusing on the climate situation in terms of your work. Can you just tell us a bit more about the foundation that you started, the Youth Climate Strike and the founder of an Earth Uprising, just for those of us who don't know?
Yeah, definitely. So I am a 15-year-old climate activist that and the founder of Earth Uprising International. And so just for a little context, my activism started in late November of 2018. And so I am originally from Northern California, but at the time I was living in New York City. And so I did end up going back and forth quite a bit, visiting my family in both areas. And so I ended up going to California when I was visiting my family for the holiday. And so during that time, the Paradise Fire broke out. And so Paradise quickly became California's worst wildfire in its history. And so my hometown was very close to that. And we ended up getting a lot of the smoke from that wildfire. At one point, it was the worst air quality in the world. And so it was, of course, a very scary situation for me to see at the time. There were people in downtown Davis who were collapsing because of smoke inhalation. And the smoke was seeping into my home. I had to roll up wet towels and put them under windows and doors to keep it from coming inside. And so I have asthma. And of course, that was just such an unhealthy situation to be in. So my family ended up sending me back to New York City from that trip early. And at that point, I was super upset because California's wildfire season is all year round now. It never ends. And it's just the entire year. And so I wanted to figure out why that is. So after researching about it, I started to see the connection between California's wildfires and the climate crisis. Of course, that made me want to do something. So I saw Greta Thunberg speak at COP24, and that was the final moment that pushed me into becoming an activist, seeing what was happening. And so I took my first form of activism going on school strike in front of the United Nations headquarters on December 14th of 2018. But then it quickly grew, and I started to realize just how many people needed to be involved in this movement. And that's what led me into finding Earth Uprising. And so one thing that I think is very important is for people to find their own climate stories. See, what happened in California was that final push for me to get involved. But a lot of people are being impacted by the climate crisis in their own community, and sometimes without even realizing it. But once they do see what's happening and they're educated on that, then they become so much more empowered. And so people's climate stories and how they get involved is so important, especially for young people when it comes to becoming an activist.
Amazing. Amazing. When I watch you young people, honestly, for me and our, older generation, it's really quite inspiring, and it's needed. So, kudos to you and all the support in, waking up the world, because it's time. It was time a long time ago, and we're even late in what we're doing, but amazing. And so how do you find a balance between being an activist and, I guess you're starting high school soon, you said, right? How do you do that? How do you balance your life to make sure that, you've got your education, and then you're also, quite strong in your movements?
Yeah, so I am actually starting high school, but right now it looks like it's going to be online. So of course that
Right.
does make me sad, but I do think it's important to keep everyone safe. And so I have had to make sure to have a balance between school and activism, of course. One thing that has been really amazing in this past year was just being able to I've gotten to learn a lot from activism that you're normally not taught in school. For
Right.
example, I've gotten to go to the United Nations and just see how a lot of the real world works. And so I am, of course, getting an education in activism. And I am still balancing, though, making sure that I am keeping up with my assignments. And I think that it is just very important to have a balance during this time, during the pandemic. Even staying at home, I've had to learn how to do my homework and still stay active and also take care of myself. So
Right.
I've done a lot of learning this past year and even in the past couple of months.
Oh, amazing. And your role in the Fridays for Futures movement, what role do you play? Like how are you? I guess the question is, during this pandemic, when you're trying to move the climate, activism movement forward, how it's affected you guys. So how have you managed to still keep it up and keep going?
Yeah, definitely. So first, a little bit about Fridays for Future.
Hmm.
A lot has happened with the Fridays for Future movement since our last big global climate strike on September 20th of 2018. We had planned a huge global climate strike on Earth Day, which was April 22nd, but by the time the world had shut down for the coronavirus pandemic. So initially, we took the Fridays for Future movement online and began digitally striking every Friday. And that is still continuing every Friday, but right now it's being rightly so overshadowed by the Black Lives Matter movement all around the world. So what we're actually seeing is that it's every day for future now because the
Right.
world is going into its 10th straight day of protesting for the Black Lives Matter movement, and the protests are accelerating. So it's like all of the movements are merging into one global uprising about racism, inequality, climate change, and environmental issues, and every other injustice the world is experiencing right now. So I think we're looking at a real Earth uprising to change humanity for the better. And so that is just very impactful to see how 2020 has turned into that, where we are finding new ways to take action, a lot of our actions online and on the streets. So it has turned into one big global uprising.
Wow, it's really quite amazing. And I guess, but my other question would be like, are you ever afraid when you're going to your protests that, because with there's peaceful protests which have been fine, but like there's been quite a few that haven't that turned quite violent in the States. So how are you feeling about that? I know
Yeah,
you said on
yeah.
Saturday, right?
Yeah, I am. I'm always careful. I think that, right now, social media is being used as a great resource for these protests. Every day, I'm seeing new resources being put up on how to stay safe at a protest. What do you need to bring to be prepared? And of course, how to be a white ally at these protests. There's resources being shared around all the time now. We're
Wow.
getting great training to stay safe. And so when I go to the protests on Saturday, I'm going to be with a big group of people and we are going to be well prepared for it. And so one thing that I think is these protests are showing is they are just bringing so much more awareness to this issue too. People cannot ignore what is going on across the country and around the world. And I think that that's the super impactful part of it, is that it's gotten to this point where people cannot look away. And that's what is the part that I think that is very important about it.
Yes, I totally agree. So I guess yes. So like you said, like it's all merging into one movement, right? For fighting for our equality as human beings at the moment, because there's a lot of injustices, and I guess a lot of the pillars of how the world has been built on are being affected now, being asked to come to term, like education, health, the way things are run on a daily basis, even our daily behaviors. It's all put on stage right now for us to look at ourselves and try and change things at the moment.
Definitely. One thing that initially drew me to the climate movement was just how intersectional it was, because the climate crisis is impacted by so many different issues. Climate change will impact immigration, climate change will impact inequality. There are so many different things that climate change will intersect with. And so seeing how people are in the climate movement but are still advocating for so many different issues was really important to me. And so one thing that I talk about a lot is, in the future, my generation will have to change every aspect of our future. For example, the climate crisis will impact where we live, where we end up going to school, whether or not we have a family or not. And so if you're a climate activist, you are basically an activist for every issue out there. And so that's the part that I find very resonating, is youth climate activists were this voice of reason and this consciousness to our political leaders.
Amazing, amazing. Well, thank you for that. So now we've got like a bunch of questions from the audience, which I guess I'd like to pose to you. We have one here from Andrew Luisi, who's asking, how do you deal with the rhetoric around being too young and inexperienced to be taken seriously or to bring about change? That's a good question. How do you deal with that?
So one thing is, it's our future, I think, is the most important part, is that, you know, young people, we are advocating for a livable planet. And so I have had the great opportunity to go to a lot of these big climate conferences. So the United Nations Climate Summit, COP, that happened in Madrid. And so I've been there alongside other youth activists while we were talking to these political leaders. And so being there in these conversations, I have learned a lot. But one thing that I have taken away is that the youth are the ones there who are constantly putting the pressure on our political leaders, because there are a lot of leaders who think that the climate crisis is in the future and that we're not seeing the impacts of it right now. You know, we have time to respond to it, but the youth are there constantly putting the pressure and saying how this is urgent. And so, of course, a lot of the response from these political leaders are, oh, you're just children. Okay. But we are a united force of children, which I think can be very scary. And all these children are coming together, and we are the future. And one thing that the youth movement, we constantly talk about, is how we don't have time to wait till we're in positions of power, because by then it'll be too late to solve the climate crisis. And so that is why we're constantly advocating right now, because it's urgent and we don't have time to wait.
Wow. So is this like is this one of the main challenges that you face as being a young activist, trying to, or what else is there that you have to also face that are, you know, by being young at the moment and an activist?
Definitely. One thing that I have to, as a young person, is I can't vote. So that is why protesting is so important. So I won't be able to vote for 3 more years, which in my opinion is far too long, especially with the clock that we're on for the climate crisis, to get it accurate action. And so one thing that is the reason why I love taking action so much is because it's a way for me to feel like I have a voice and I'm able to actually have a say in my future. It makes me feel much more in control of what is happening. And so there are so many young people involved in this movement who can't vote yet. And so we are constantly having to make sure that our voices are heard in the political system outside of voting. So having a say in our legislation. And a lot of young people are starting to get involved with legislation, pushing for it, and even proposing legislation to their city council members and to other levels of government. And so we have found different ways to make sure that our voices are heard on the political system outside of what is usually considered the way to make your voice heard on politics.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Okay, and here I have another question from our audience, Anna Prada Pays. How can we encourage youth to get involved in climate change activism? It's a good question.
Yeah, so I think that there are first so many different ways to get involved in activism, and I think that one thing is, first of all, finding what resonates with you. What is your specific message that you want to get involved in climate activism? What different part? There are some people who focus on education, which is what I focus on, bringing in more young people into this movement. Some people focus on the systems of oppression, and others focus on the political system. So finding first off what resonates with you and where you think your voice has a better portion in this movement and what can you contribute best to it. And so I think that that is, first of all, a great way to get young people involved, is what they think that they can be good at. And then the other thing is, when it comes to getting adult allies involved in the movement, I think that it's very important for adults to become a fan of the youth climate movement. So for example, fund, amplify, and narrate. So first of all, in the climate movement, one thing that happens a lot is there becomes this economic inequality. And so a lot of young people who are able to go and make their voices heard are the ones who have their message shared more, just because they're able to, and they're able to go and afford to speak somewhere. But then a lot of activists whose voices need to be heard the most are the ones who are unable to go to these places. So being able to fund the climate movement is very important, because we are, as well, young people are doing this with no contribution, with having to pay out of pocket for these movements and organizing. So it's just very important to help us in that aspect. And then amplify. When activists are protesting, make sure to connect us with those who are able to get our message out even farther. If we're at a protest, make sure to amplify our message on social media as well. That's so important. And then lastly, narrate. Find, of course, your climate story. Narrate, because what you are experiencing is important as well when it comes to those around you. When you talk about what's happening in your own community to those, to your friends, to your family, then you see people's mindsets start to change around the climate crisis, as well as when it comes to the political system. When you're talking about how you're affected by the climate crisis, that gets lawmakers' attention. And when you're talking to your politicians, they listen to what you are personally experiencing. So find your own story about how you're being impacted. And so that is another way to get involved in the movement, whether you're an adult ally, be a fan of it. I think that activism needs to be intergenerational, and that's the only way we'll be able to get action.
Great. And so far, what have you seen about, adults supporting your movement? How what's the experience so far? Are we doing a good job or not, or is more needs to be done? What's your take on it?
Yes, well, I think that we need intergenerational activism, and that's the only way we'll be able to get action, because as young people, first off, we come in with these new ideas. So of course, with adults, we have a lot that we can learn. We can listen and hear what they have gone through and everything that they have done, and just listen to the ways that they have done activism before. And then as young people, we can come in with these new ideas. And what I've seen is that young people, we think outside of the box when it comes to these actions and organizing. And so there is a lot that we have to learn from each other. I think that young people should listen to the advice of the older generations, but also I think adult allies need to listen to their young people as well, and the ideas that we have. I think both have to be patient and work together with each other.
Great. I agree. And I have another really good question here from Angelica Hernandez Goes. Climate change is a very long-term fight. What gives you more hope? What gives you hope in this?
Yeah, so there are a lot of things that give me hope, of course, but I think that the main thing that gives me hope is all of the uprisings that are happening. I think that every time I see that there are people out there protesting and people that really care, that is one thing that makes me hopeful for the future. And seeing how young people are assembling together when we connect with each other and we work together and we have that unified message, that is a main factor of hope. And throughout this movement, I have met so many other people who I'm glad to be able to call my friends. And I think that it's that sense of community that you end up building that makes you keep going, and it makes you hopeful. And so that is what has kept me sane throughout this pandemic, of course, but also just when it comes to organizing and protesting is the people you surround yourself with. And after all of these uprisings, when we do have our vision for a better world, and when that's completed, I think that all of us will share this collective experience, and we'll all be closer because of everything we went through together.
Very true. And so how do you see the situation in the States playing out from where we are, where as right now, it seems like it's crunch time, where it's growing, where, you know, people want their voices to be heard. How do you hope to see it unfold?
I hope that it's going to continue to get bigger. I think that this is a long overdue conversation. Seeing what has happened in these past couple days, I think that it's just going to continue to grow. I think more people are going to end up protesting and getting involved in some level. And I think that, so over the past couple days, we ended up getting justice for George Floyd when the cops were charged with second-degree murder. But there are still so many people who need to be justified. We have so much more work that we need to do that we cannot stop, and we have to continue fighting to bring down these systems of oppression that have been mantled. White supremacy did end up causing the climate crisis. And there are so many things that we have to start identifying in our own system that has to change. So we cannot continue going on the same way that we have forever with oppression and with police brutality. It all has to change in order for us to get action on different levels with the climate crisis, inequality. And so everything was caused. I think that there's a lot of oppression that was caused to lead to these different issues. So it all is a chain reaction. And so we must continue protesting to dismantle that. And I think that over the next couple of days, the passion that people are feeling is just going to continue growing, and we're going to see more people protesting. And I hope internationally that more countries as well start to join us, and there are more people out there in solidarity, because that is what I truly love to see, is the international solidarity to this.
I hope so too. And I understand that, you know, that there are a lot of protests planned this weekend, right? And global, all over. And yes, things do need to change. But it's really inspiring speaking to you. I've had goosebumps most of the time, you know, because it's just to listen to young people and how eloquent you are and passionate about what you're doing. It's amazing if you're starting now. So hopefully, you know, that this, you know, you are heard and things do change, because we do want a different future and a different world for you guys. So I guess as a closing, because we've got like basically about 3 minutes left, or 2 minutes, you know, would you have any last messages that you know, to your kids in your generation, or to the older generations, or anything that you want to put out there as we come to the end of our really fantastic interview that we've had today?
Yeah, I think that the final thing that I'd like to say is that now is the time to become an activist, whether you have been before or you haven't ever been to a protest. I think now is the time to find your voice and become an activist. It's the time for an uprising, and I hope that everybody finds their own voice and joins it.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us and for getting out of bed so early to lend your voice here, which has been important, and it's really important that you are heard. I appreciate it and wish you all the best. Stay safe this weekend. And yes, we wish for a better world.
Yay, thank you so much. It was great talking with you.